they're already old, right? So that they're in their old age. They're gonna spend the money. The workers working overtime gonna spend the money. He also said we're gonna cut taxes. What for policemen? No taxes for policemen, firemen, military. I mean, there's so many people. Everybody is going to sign on to these tax cuts. Plus, they are going to extend the expiring Trump tax cuts and expand them. He wants to lower corporate taxes even more. Now, look, I'm all for lower taxes, but only if you have a smaller government so that you don't need the tax revenue. If you don't cut government, but you cut taxes, how are you paying for all that government? Well, you're paying for it with inflation. See, Trump promised to cut all these taxes, but he also promised lower inflation. You can't have both. If he cuts the taxes, we're going to have higher inflation. The inflation is the tax. He promised lower mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are going up. Credit card rates, all interest rates are going to have to go up because of these massive deficits. Now, so the markets are going to start to realize what's coming, that we're going to get the tax cuts for sure, and we're not going to get the spending cuts to offset it. Now, we will have tariffs, and that will somewhat offset the tax cuts because Americans will have more money because they're paying lower taxes, but the stuff they buy will be more expensive because of the tariffs. So they'll have more money to pay higher prices. So the tariffs will replace some of the revenue that the government loses to the tax cuts, but not anywhere close to all of it. It's going to be a net big loss of revenue to the government at a time when it actually needs a lot more revenue to cover the spending, which is going up, right? The spending is going to increase. Not only are they not going to cut spending, spending's going up because it's on autopilot. Even if they don't vote to increase it, it increases anyway. Unless you vote to decrease it, which they won't, it grows on autopilot. And so what I think is going to happen is the markets are going to bring this honeymoon to a close, maybe even before Trump is married with his, inauguration. The honeymoon could be over before the marriage starts because the bond market could rain on this parade. If you remember, it was in 2022. So Great Britain, they have budget deficits, not as big as ours. They have a debt problem, not as big as ours, but they've got a problem, right? So in 2022, because the economy was bad, right? They elected Liz Truss, right? Tory, she became the prime minister of the UK. And of course, she ran on tax cuts, right? That's what you do when you're, the Republican type candidate here in the UK, right? They're like the Republicans. So, hey, we want tax cuts. But the problem is you have a huge budget deficit. So how do you just cut taxes when you have a debt problem, right? You cut taxes, you make your underlying problem worse, which is what Trump is threatening to do. We have a badly malinvested economy. We don't save enough. We don't invest enough in real plant and equipment. We borrow too much. We spend too much. The whole economy is screwed up with these huge trade deficits, huge budget deficits. We need to fix that. But what Trump wants to do is fuel that. He just wants to make that, house of cards even bigger, right? So that when it collapses, it's even worse. So Liz Truss wanted to do the same thing. And so they proposed these tax cuts. And then what happened? The bond market collapsed, or the gilt market over in the UK. So the pound collapsed. And at one point, intraday, for the first time in history, the pound was worth less than $1. That had never happened before. And it bounced back. But for a brief moment in time, $1 bought more than 1 pound. And so rates were soaring. The bond market vigilantes awoke from their slumber and put a stop to the rate cuts and Liz Truss's tenure. She is now the shortest serving prime minister in the history of the UK. She was in office for all of 49 days. Now, the pound sterling isn't the world reserve currency, but the same situation applies to the United States. The debt is now so big, the budget deficit so large, and the movement to de-dollarize is already underway, despite the knee-jerk reaction today in the foreign exchange markets. I don't think the bond market is going to allow this, right? Interest rates are going to keep rising, and that may stop the tax cuts from ever arising, because we could actually have a crisis before Trump even takes the oath of office, which would be great news, because then it's hard to blame Trump. I mean, maybe they'll say, well, it's because people are worried about Trump. But if it happens while Biden is still in office, so much the better. But if we don't get a bond crisis that stops the tax cuts before they happen, we'll get a bond crisis after the tax cuts happen, which of course will be worse for the, blaming it on Trump. But it's going to happen. There is no way. Now, there's only one way that you could stop this, because the UK really didn't have, this ace up its sleeve like we do for now. The Fed is going to have to go back to QE, which is what I've been saying they're going to do. The only way to stop long-term interest rates from soaring and crushing the economy and the stock market and the banks and everything, right, that Trump is promising to pump up,